I had been working tirelessly for the past 2 years, saving every penny to plan the perfect European vacation for my parents and me. Every detail was meticulously arranged: luxury hotels, exclusive guided tours, fine dining, and cultural experiences. This wasn't just a trip. It was my way of showing gratitude to my parents, a way to share something special with them. But that morning, as I arrived at their house to drive them to the airport, everything shattered. Mom stepped out with a bright smile, dragging her suitcase behind her. But before I could greet her, my sister Lauren followed, rolling her own luggage along. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though my pulse had already quickened. Mom turned to me, her expression too cheerful for what she was about to say. "Oh, Violet, we decided Lauren should go instead of you. She's been really stressed lately, and she could use a break." I froze. "Instead of me? Mom, I spent years planning this. I paid for everything." She waved a hand dismissively, as if I were complaining about something trivial. "And we're so grateful, sweetheart. But you're always working so hard. You can go another time. Lauren needs this right now." Lauren didn't even have the decency to look guilty. Instead, she smirked slightly, shifting her weight. "Thanks for understanding, sis." My heart pounded. I turned to Dad, hoping for some kind of intervention, but he merely handed me his suitcase without making eye contact, like he didn't want to be a part of this conversation. "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice trembling. "This was supposed to be something we shared." "It still is," Mom replied with a shrug. "Just with Lauren instead." I bit my tongue. I wanted to scream, to throw their suitcases on the ground and demand an explanation, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Lauren was always the priority. I forced a tight-lipped smile. "Let's get going then." The drive to the airport was silent except for Lauren's chatter. "Oh my God, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? I can't wait to go shopping there. Do you think we'll have time for that? Or will the tours take up the whole day?" My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I stared at the road ahead, forcing myself not to say anything. "Of course we'll have time," Mom giggled. "We'll figure it out when we get there." "When we get there?" As if I were no longer part of that we. Dad cleared his throat at one point. "Thank you for driving us, Violet. I know this probably feels unusual." "Unusual," I repeated, my voice void of emotion. "That's an interesting way to put it, Dad." He didn't respond, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. From the back, Lauren leaned forward. "You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you, letting me go. I could never afford this on my own." I clenched my jaw and forced another tight smile. "Of course, Lauren. Enjoy the trip." By the time we reached the airport, my patience was hanging by a thread. I helped them unload their bags and Mom hugged me. "Thank you for understanding, dear. This means a lot to us and to Lauren." I nodded stiffly. "Sure, Mom." Lauren grinned, wheeling her bag toward the entrance. "Thanks, Violet. You're the best." I stood there, watching them disappear into the terminal, my chest tight with anger and hurt. The drive home was a blur. I replayed every word in my head, each one cutting deeper. "This means a lot to Lauren. You're not mad, right? You're always working so hard." I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few moments, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then, without thinking twice, I stormed into my house, opened my laptop, and logged into every travel account I had used to book their trip. One by one, I canceled everything: the hotel reservations, the tour bookings, the airline upgrades. As the confirmation emails flooded my inbox, a sense of satisfaction settled over me. They could explain themselves at the front desk in Paris. I was done being their doormat. It didn't take long before the call started. I ignored the first few as I calmly unpacked my own suitcase, the one I had packed so carefully for a trip that was no longer mine. But the calls kept coming. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up. "Violet!" Mom's voice was shrill with panic. "What have you done? The hotel says our reservation was canceled. The tours aren't booked anymore?" I let her yell for a moment before calmly responding, "Yeah, I canceled them." There was silence on the line before she exploded. "Why would you do that?" "Oh, I don't know," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe because you decided to take Lauren on my trip." You're lucky I even drove you to the airport. We thought you'd understand, she snapped. Understand what? I shot back, my voice rising. That years of planning and saving meant nothing because Lauren needed a break? That my effort didn't matter? Guess what, Mom? I don't understand. And I don't care to. I hung up before she could say another word, switched off my phone, and tossed it onto the couch. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The next day, when I turned my phone back on, the messages flooded in. From Mom. You've gone too far. Your sister is in tears. Your father's upset. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. Call me right now. From Lauren. You're acting like a child. I don't see why you're making this such a big deal. Just fix it already. From Dad. We need to talk. This isn't right. I set my phone down and took a deep breath. For years, I had been the one to fix things, to make sure everyone was comfortable and happy. But now that I had stepped back, they didn't know what to do. When my phone rang again, I finally picked up. Violet, Mom started before I could even say hello. This isn't funny anymore. We are stranded. Do you know how embarrassing this is? I took a slow sip of my coffee. Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, planning every detail, only to be told you're not even invited on your own trip. Stop being dramatic, she snapped. Lauren needed this more than you. And now she can figure it out, I said coolly. You made your choice, Mom. You wanted to take Lauren instead of me. That's fine, but don't expect me to fund her vacation. We're family, she said, her voice desperate. We don't do this to each other. I laughed bitterly. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. I could hear Lauren's voice in the background, whining. Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible. That was the final straw. Enjoy your trip, I said flatly. Oh, wait, you can't because it isn't yours. It was mine, and now it belongs to no one. I hung up. I felt an odd mix of anger and relief. Angry that they had put me in this position, but relieved that I had finally stood up for myself. For the next few days, I ignored their messages, their guilt-tripping, their calls. Instead, I focused on myself. For the first time in my life, I put myself first. When they finally returned, exhausted and miserable, I was waiting for them on the porch. I hope you're happy, Lauren sneered. You ruined everything. I took another sip of coffee, letting their words wash over me. Oh, you mean like how you ruined my trip? Mom stepped forward. Violet, you should have let this go. No, Mom, I said firmly. You should have never taken me for granted. I picked up my bag, turned away, and left them standing there. This time, they could figure things out on their own. I was done being their backup plan. As I walked away from my parents' house, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix everything. I wasn't the one trying to make things right. They had made their decision, and now they had to deal with the consequences. When I got home, I curled up on my couch with a cup of tea and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My phone buzzed again. More texts from Mom, from Lauren, even a hesitant message from Dad. I didn't even bother reading them. Instead, I turned my phone off and decided to enjoy the peace. Over the next few days, I started doing things for myself. I went to that little cafe I'd always passed by but never had time to visit. I started reading a book I'd left untouched on my shelf for months. I even went to a yoga class, something I never would have done before because my schedule was always packed with work and family obligations. Grace, my best friend, showed up at my door a few days later with a knowing smile and 2 lattes in hand. So how does it feel to finally have a spine? She teased, handing me a cup. I smirked, taking a sip. It feels weird, but good. I bet. She flopped onto my couch. So what's next? Are you going to keep ignoring them forever? Or are you going to make them grovel a little first? I chuckled, but the truth was, I didn't know. A part of me wanted them to suffer, to really feel what it was like to be tossed aside like I had been. But another part of me knew that no amount of guilt-tripping would change who they were. They had always favored Lauren, always expected me to be the responsible one, the one who sacrificed. They weren't going to wake up one day and suddenly treat me differently. But I had changed, and that was enough. 2 weeks later, I made a decision. I was going to take that trip after all, but alone. I had spent so much time planning the perfect European vacation, and I refused to let it go to waste. So I rebooked the flights, rearranged my itinerary, and packed my bags. The day before I was set to leave, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Violet? Mom's voice was softer than it had been in weeks. We need to talk. About what? I said, keeping my tone neutral. About everything, she sighed. About the trip, about Lauren, about the way we treated you. I leaned back in my chair, waiting. We were wrong, she admitted, and for a moment I thought I had misheard her. We shouldn't have done that to you, and I know you don't want to hear excuses, but I guess we just assumed you'd understand, like you always do. Yeah, I said flatly. That was your first mistake. There was silence on the other end. We miss you, she finally said. Your dad, too. Even Lauren, though she won't admit it. Can we fix this? I hesitated. That depends. On what? On whether you actually mean it, or if this is just another attempt to get me back in line. She sighed again. Violet, we love you. We didn't realize how much we hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive us right away, but I want to try. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of her words. Maybe she was sincere. Maybe she really had learned something from all of this. But I wasn't about to just let them off the hook. I'm going on my trip, I said, my voice firm. Alone. I know, she said quietly. I saw your booking confirmation in my email. You used the same travel agency. Of course, she had been watching. I hope you have an amazing time, Violet. I really do. I didn't know what to say to that, so I simply replied, Thanks, Mom. The next day I boarded my flight, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. I spent 2 weeks exploring Europe on my own, and every single day felt like a revelation. I wandered through cobblestone streets, ate meals in charming little cafes, and watched the sunset from the steps of the Eiffel Tower. I wasn't worried about making sure someone else was happy. I wasn't adjusting my plans to fit my parents' needs. I was just living, and it was incredible. When I returned home, I found a letter in my mailbox from Mom. Violet, we don't deserve your forgiveness, but we hope to earn it. No more expectations, no more treating you like an afterthought. We love you, and we want to be better. Please let us try. I folded the letter and set it aside. Maybe one day I'd be ready to let them back in, but for now I was going to keep choosing myself, because for the first time in my life, I was my own priority. As I placed the letter on my desk, I let out a slow breath. Maybe this was genuine. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it didn't change the fact that I had already taken the first steps toward a life where I wasn't just an afterthought. My parents and Lauren had spent their whole lives assuming I would always be there, always bending, always understanding. They had taken my sacrifices for granted for so long that they never stopped to think what would happen if I finally stopped. And now, for the first time, they were the ones left stranded. The trip they had stolen from me turned into a disaster for them. They had no reservations, no tours, no luxury. Instead, they had stress, frustration, and disappointment. Lauren, who had always been handed everything on a silver platter, had finally tasted the consequences of entitlement. My parents, who had always prioritized her, had finally felt the weight of their choices. And me, I had never felt more at peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't seeking revenge. I had moved on. And that, more than anything, was what they couldn't handle. Because for the first time, they weren't in control. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fix things, to be the responsible one, to be the one who made everything better. They had spent years making me feel like I was never enough, and now they were the ones left feeling like nothing they did would ever be enough to bring me back. I could still hear Lauren's voice from that day at the airport. You're acting like a child. You're being so petty. But was I? Or had I simply stopped playing by their rules? The truth was, this wasn't just about the trip. This was about every time they had pushed me aside, every time they had taken advantage of my kindness, every time they had expected me to put them first while they put me last. And now, for the first time, they were the ones feeling abandoned. It wasn't about revenge. It was about breaking free. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their love, their approval, their recognition. But now, I realized something. I didn't need it. I never had. I had spent years thinking that if I just worked harder, if I just gave more, if I just proved myself, maybe one day they would finally see me, finally choose me. But they never would, because they had never had to. Until now. I stood up from my desk and walked to my balcony, letting the cool evening air brush against my skin. In the distance, the city lights twinkled like a million possibilities waiting to be explored. I wasn't the girl who spent her life waiting for validation anymore. I wasn't the girl who sacrificed everything for people who wouldn't do the same for me. I wasn't the girl who let herself be walked over and dismissed. I was the girl who booked a solo trip to Europe and discovered the world on her own terms. I was the girl who set boundaries and refused to let anyone make her feel small again. I was the girl who finally realized that she didn't need to prove her worth to anyone, because she had always been enough. As for my parents and Lauren, they had their own journey to take now, a journey of realizing what they had lost, a journey of understanding that sometimes you don't get unlimited chances sometimes. You take someone for granted for so long that when you finally realize what you've done, it's too late. Maybe they would change. Maybe they wouldn't. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I had given them enough of my time, my energy, my love. Now it was time to give all of that to myself. What would you have done in my place? Would you have canceled the trip? Would you have forgiven them? Let me know in the comments below, because I know I'm not the only one who has ever felt like the forgotten child. And if you've ever been in my shoes, let me tell you this. You don't have to keep proving yourself to people who refuse to see your worth. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. And trust me, when you finally do, you'll realize that the life waiting for you on the other side is so much bigger, so much brighter, and so much freer than you ever imagined.